Hey, good morning, Indiana. Welcome to Who's Left This Week, the unapologetically progressive Sunday morning news show for the Hoosier State. My name is Scott Aaron Rogers, broadcasting live from Bloomington. Another packed show this week as we take a drink from the fire hose. I've got a couple great guests here to join me. I'll introduce them momentarily. First, I do ask if you could please if you find it in your heart to support us at Progressive Indiana Network with a paid subscription, it's only $5 a month or $50 for the whole year to help us bring you programming like this, like Derek Holder's Hold 'em Accountable. We've got Brianna Newhart, the recovered Republican, on board. We're also now carrying the Concerned Clergy podcast from Reverends Tony Alexander and David Green up in Indianapolis. Good stuff from them. We need your help bringing you more quality Indiana progressive content like that. Please give us a follow on social media. Either way, we're at Progressive Indiana Network, spelled out, full name. Most of your social media sites on TikTok and Blue Sky, it is at PIN Indiana. Follow me, Old Scott here at Who's Left. That's HOOS Left on most of your social media sites. All right. Enough of that. Enough of the shameless self-promotion. Not my forte. I like to gab with my friends, and I've got a couple great ones today. First, let's welcome back to the show our good friend, Michelle Higgs from Indiana Rural Summit. Michelle, welcome.
Hi, everybody. Hey, Scott.
Michelle, so much going on. Way
Yes.
too much again this week.
Way too much. Every day it's a new story, and you don't even get a chance to adjust to the previous one. But that's why we do this stuff together, right?
It's true. It's true. You know what? Taking this on all the time, we're getting the heart rate up. Probably not great for your health. So maybe Dr. Rob Stone can help us navigate that. Doc, welcome back.
Well, I'm glad to be back. And yeah, I hope I can keep up with all the changes that are going on and something useful.
Something new all the time, So listen, let's dig in. We've been following this one for the last several weeks. It's been the top story, and we're going to start there again this week in Minnesota with ICE and the Department of Homeland Security and Border Patrol getting up to their shenanigans. So a little bit of good news to start. Last weekend, 5-year-old Liam Ramos, you remember him, the kid in the bunny hat. He and his father had been had been transferred to a family detention facility in Texas. Well, last week, they were returned to Minnesota after a judge ordered them released. Now, DHS already filed a motion to expedite deportation on Wednesday, but Friday, another judge granted a continuance, postponing the case to a later date. Now, staying on ICE, the U.S. House of Representatives passed a government funding package on it was Tuesday, to end a partial shutdown. The House ended this short 4-day shutdown by passing a package of funding bills which will fund the government until October. It was a weird bipartisan vote with 196 Republicans and 21 Democrats voting for, and 193 Democrats and 21 Republicans voting no. One of the no Republicans was Victoria Spartz. For the right reasons, who knows? But this fight is going to come right back up again. Department of Homeland Security is only funded until the end of this coming week. Democrats are demanding an end to roving raids, no arrests without the judicial warrants, no more masks on the agents, and mandatory use of body cameras. Now, along those lines, Kristi Noem did say on Monday that body cameras are being immediately issued to ICE agents throughout Minneapolis. They not have them before. During the Biden administration, he had ordered all federal law enforcement officers to wear body cameras. With an executive order in 2022, Trump rescinded that order upon taking office. Now, in the good developments category, Tom Homan, Trump's border czar, said on Wednesday that the number of federal agents in Minnesota would be reduced by about 30%. Now, it's from 3,000 to 2,300, meaning there are still more federal agents in the Twin Cities than there are police officers of those towns. However, Governor of Minnesota Tim Walz and the Attorney General Keith Ellison both called it a step in the right direction. Community advocates are calling it a political stunt and an empty PR gesture. And you're seeing little changes, according to residents in Minnesota. They're saying ICE sightings are just as high in the chat forums that the activists are on. Feds raided a Minneapolis apartment building with more than a dozen agents. Wednesday, they were still seen circling elementary schools and posted nearby at dismissal. Earlier in the week, agents drew their weapons and arrested activists who had been following their vehicles. Local school leaders who have spoken out against ICE have been stalked by the feds. So, let's open this thing up here, Michelle. A couple good developments, I guess. Obviously, on the personal level, it's good to see little Liam and his father come home. But on a broader scope, this reduction in force announced by Homan, is it a step in the right direction? Or, as some of these activists say, is this just an empty gesture?
I think it's an empty gesture. I think especially one of the things that you don't have in that list is the increase of purchases of empty warehouses across the U.S. to add detention centers, and that is particularly impacting rural. And so I'm following that train of thinking. But I feel like we're in a moment where it is the people rising up, both in mutual aid in these communities where ICE is showing up. We're hearing from in Minneapolis where there are people that are making food deliveries and helping shuttle children back and forth to things. And it's like community is going to be community. But it also is a call for a return to local control on some things. And I feel my biggest worry is that the victory of having little Liam return can give some people a sense of, oh, look, things are going back to, unquotes, normal. None of this is normal, and we've seen how this plays out. And again, I keep circling back to there is a ton of money that is being made in our incarceration system, and this is one aspect of it on steroids, and that needs to be absolutely still focused, eyes on that.
Doc, we're going to be doing the shutdown fight again here in a week, it looks like.
Yeah.
Are Democrats even holding out for enough, and did they give away their leverage by peeling this away from the larger government funding last week?
I feel like I have a pretty good understanding of policy, particularly around healthcare. That's my strong suit. Politics continues to be a bewildering miasma of ambiguity. Now, maybe that phrasing itself is pretty overly wordy. I don't know. So I just can't judge where the Democrats need to have more backbone. It's easy to judge where I wish the Republicans would find a little backbone and speak up for their principles, because I grew up in a Republican family and I know what Republican principles are all about. But just to switch focus a little bit, we were traveling last week and we met a couple from Minneapolis, and the first thing was, how to, you never know when you're traveling. You look at people, you make some judgments about them. You never know exactly where to take a conversation. We said, oh, we're so sorry about what's going on in Minneapolis. And they immediately said, courage is contagious. And we're seeing this caring. We hope that our work on the streets in Minneapolis, that our communities in Minneapolis are really turning the tide nationally. And I hope they're right. But just that feeling of, yeah, we can do this. We can stand up. It's scary. It's dangerous. It's cold out there. But we've got to we got to come together and push back. And courage is contagious.
100%. And, I wish our legislators would catch some of that courage from their constituents, because, like you said, it's frustrating. It is a circling miasma. The politics of it are gross, because it's like, what are we doing here? Like, people with a moral center are like, there is obviously a right thing to do here, and politicians, even, some of the nominally good ones, the ones that are on, quote unquote our side, are really squishy on this, and it's super disappointing. So let's move on. So, we said there was little change, right, in the behavior of the agents even after this drawdown was announced. Well, listen, also in the nothing is new department, President Trump, it turns out, is a corrupt, racist narcissist. Now, we saw a story earlier this week from the Wall Street Journal where a Abu Dhabi royal purchased just less than half of the World Liberty Financial crypto firm owned by the Trump family 4 days before the president's second inauguration, funneling nearly $200 million to the Trump family. Sheikh Tahnoun bin Zayed Al Nahyan, the United Arab Emirates president's brother, had been pushing the U.S. for access to advanced AI chips during the Biden administration, but was largely stymied over his firm's connections to the Chinese tech giant Huawei. Now, Tahnoun met several times with Trump and Steve Witkoff, his envoy, and others in the first few months of the new administration. And guess what? In May, he was granted access to 500,000 advanced AI chips a year. Now, in another department, but also in something that reeks of corruption and narcissism, Trump announced plans to close the Kennedy Center for 2 years beginning in July. And he announced this last Sunday. And this follows a series of cancellations by a range of performers in response to Trump announcing plans to add his own name to the building. So other things Trump wants to name after himself include New York's famed Penn Station, the busiest rail depot in the country, as well as Dulles International Airport in Washington. So apparently, and this is from the New York Times, administration officials have told Senate Minority Leader Chuck Schumer they would release billions of dollars in infrastructure funding for New York if he agreed to help rename Penn Station and Dulles Airport after President Trump. The administration began withholding funds for the $16 billion Gateway project. It's a new twin-track rail tunnel under the Hudson River meant to replace the deteriorating 100-plus-year-old tunnels at the heart of the Northeast Corridor rail route, the country's busiest, back in October, citing DEI concerns. Because, of course, the project, which employs about 1,000 workers, was halted Friday after they ran out of money, and the state is suing the federal government this week over $205 million in payments. Washington was expected to foot about 3/4 of the bill for this project. And finally, in the Trump is a piece of garbage news section here, Trump will not apologize for sharing a since-deleted racist video depicting the Obamas as apes on Truth Social. Now, this was posted as part of another late-night posting spree on Thursday. On his Truth Social platform, the Obamas briefly appear near the end of a minute-long video with their faces superimposed on the bodies of apes. It remained online for about 12 hours, with officials from both sides of the aisle calling for its removal. Trump refused to apologize, threw a staffer under the bus, blaming them for the post, which was eventually deleted. Now, the majority of this video was about false claims about the 2020 election, which we will cover next. But Michelle, I don't know, where do you even want to begin there? I guess let's work backwards. Did you see the video? It is just gross stuff.
I actually did not. I was hearing about it, and I personally chose not to go seek that out because the people who I love were deeply hurt by that, and so it was one of those things that I don't need to see trash to know it's trash. I think when we talk about a narcissist, one of the things that I keep going back to is they feed off of energy, negative or positive, it doesn't matter. And so the more people keep talking about and centering Trump and his behavior, the more that just fuels it. And I feel like the more we can actually focus on the where the rubber meets the road. For example, if people are losing jobs, if they are losing healthcare, let's amplify that story. Let's amplify the impact. And then let's amplify where we actually have the power to do something different. So if there's states that are able to bypass some of the federal budget things, where are we seeing those inroads happening? Because that's where I feel like we get empowerment. And again, it's that right now we are seeing a shift from the individual to the federal, and we need to have it come back to the states and the individual, and we just need creativity on understanding where those levers are.
Doc, one of my favorite authors, Sarah Kendzior, former Hoosier, by the way, she got her master's here at IU, says that Trump covers up corruption with scandal. And I think this thing with the Kennedy Center, with the racist video, with the naming things after himself, like Michelle said, it's a distraction from the real human tragedies. And like the first story in this section, the blatant corruption of having hundreds of $1 million funneled directly to his family from some shady Arab sheikh, that seems to be the real story here.
Yeah, it's blinding how many things they throw at us, and all the distractions. It's distractions heaped on distractions. I'm again coming back to my Republican upbringing, because today would be my mother's 103rd birthday, and I remember how she felt when she had she'd done early voting, and she had cast her early vote in the Republican primary some years. This was some years ago, when this guy Richard Murdoch was in the primary trying to run for Senate, and he ended up saying some terrible things about rape. And then there was my mom, who couldn't change her vote because she'd done early voting after he said this. But I keep hoping, and maybe this is giving too much hope to hope, but that each of these things is going to peel off a little bit more support. And when are we going to get to the tipping point where enough Republicans wake up and enough Democrats find their courage, and we can get our country back?
Well, Doc, it's kind of funny that you mentioned that. Like, obviously, we want people to wake up. We want folks to see the corruption, to see the blatant racism. There was a really good clip where some Republican who had voted for Trump 3 times called into C-SPAN and apologized for having done so. I want to say this was on Friday after the video came out. But my concern, I guess, is it going to matter if these folks wake up and they vote the right way? Because are we going to have free and fair elections in November? Now, I want to move on to that. We tracked last week. So Tulsi Gabbard, the director of national intelligence, was in Atlanta during an FBI raid where agents basically stormed an elections office and took Fulton County's ballots and things from the 2020 election. Now, sources report that Gabbard personally put Trump on the phone the next day with some of the FBI agents who conducted the search. That is highly unusual. She claims her presence at the raid was requested by the president. Trump, on the other hand, passed the buck to Attorney General Pam Bondi, saying she insisted that Tulsi attend the search. In the same interview, Trump also insinuated, quote, international cheating. That was with NBC's Tom Yamas. Now, Gabbard is apparently also running a solo 2020 election inquiry separate from the FBI investigation. This has been focused on potential vulnerabilities in voting machines and potential foreign interference, mirroring a bizarre conspiracy involving Venezuela that Trump lawyers Rudy Giuliani and Sidney Powell perpetuated after the 2020 election. Along those lines, it turns out, and we're just finding this week out from Reuters an exclusive, that last spring, a team from Gabbard's office accessed voting machines in Puerto Rico, investigating the same Venezuela conspiracy and finding, of course, no clear evidence of such. But perhaps most concerning about Gabbard this week is that an intelligence official has accused her of wrongdoing, the disclosure of which would cause, quote, grave damage to national security. Now, the whistleblower filed a complaint last May with the Inspector General for the intelligence community, and though the IG is required to assess the credibility of the accusation and share their findings with lawmakers within 3 weeks, Gabbard is personally accused of stonewalling its transmission by failing to provide security guidance on how to do so safely. Finally, and only after it was reported in the Wall Street Journal, did a small circle from the so-called Gang of Eight get to read a heavily redacted version of the complaint on a read-to-return basis. Michelle, how do you handle that if the director of national intelligence themselves is a national security concern?
Yeah. I feel, and you guys kind of brought this up before, there's so much noise, right? And it's just, let's throw everything at the wall. And so really this is all about seeding a mistrust of our election systems, and sowing a, I don't know, just a way of either people don't want to trust voting, they want to show up at the polls and they're going to be angry and assume the worst of whoever's working at the polls. They're going to mistrust the results from an election where we know that the Democrats are going to overperform and do very well in 2026, just by virtue of having more people running for office. We've already seen in the special elections across the state or across the nation what is the shift that's happening. And so I feel like all of this is really the optics to keep a small segment of people in a bubble to go, everything is corrupt in our elections. I also just want to name that, at least for me, our hyper local elections will always be, how do you say it? It's like a one-to-one. For example, you go and you're voting for a township trustee, and it is at those smaller races that you're seeing a difference in 3 votes and somebody wins, a difference in 20 votes. And so at the very hyper local, our local governments will be operating, per normal. Where I see the biggest questions is at the federal. So this is why we focus on state and local with the Rules Summit. Like, that is our laser focus.
And we are going to come back to statewide elections in the back half of the show. A lot of exciting news in that regard. Doc, I don't know. Do you care to speculate wildly about what Tulsi could potentially be up to that is of such grave concern to national security?
Well, Tulsi Gabbard, who, as I recall, ran for president not that long ago in the Democratic primary. She dropped out fairly early, but that was in the Democratic primary that she ran for president. So I cannot speculate on what she might be up to, but I do think about this whole election thing. I think it's one of the most terrifying aspects of the news of this thing that Gabbard was involved in. Just her presence just makes it all the more bizarre with the Fulton County votes. But I also go back to Trump tends to do what he says he's going to do. The one thing about him that is predictable is that he does tend to do the things that he says he's going to do. And he said way long ago, well, not way long ago in terms of years, but in terms of months and a few years, he said, if you vote for me in this last election, you won't have to vote again. And that was pretty telling. I think it's safe to say the Republicans and Trump are going to try to figure out. They are working day and night on how they can be sure to steal as many votes as they can in the midterms, and it's a terrifying prospect. But I am beyond bewildered by this particular thing. But just because I'm bewildered doesn't mean I'm not terrified about this whole Fulton County thing.
It's scary, and like Michelle said, it seems like they're seeding the ground to do stuff, very shadily. Gabbard's been tied variously to the Assad regime when they were still a thing in Syria, and of course to the Russians. It seems like Trump would very much like to have his elections go like they do in those countries. And along those lines, of course, this week Trump is threatening a federal election takeover, saying that Republicans should nationalize elections. On Monday, he said, quote, "The Republicans should say, we want to take over. We should take over the voting in at least 15 places. The Republicans ought to nationalize the voting." This during an interview with podcaster turned deputy FBI director turned podcaster Dan Bongino. Now, this mirrors a social media post from last August in which Trump said, quote, "The states are merely an agent of the federal government in counting and tabulating the votes." Now, Senate Majority Leader John Thune pointed to the constitutional requirements that states conduct their own elections in throwing cold water on this thing, saying he's a big believer in decentralizing and distributing power. On the other side of things, however, former Trump advisor and still very close to folks in the White House, Steve Bannon, called for Trump to deploy ICE and military troops to polling sites. On his War Room podcast on Tuesday, he said he wants ICE and the military to, quote, surround the polls in November. Trump said last month that he should have used the National Guard to seize voting machines after the 2020 election, which he had an executive order already drafted up and ready to do. So, the FBI also this week summoned state election officials to a secretive meeting after Trump's threat. In a mass email that went out from DHS, the DOJ, and the FBI, they invited state election officials to a teleconference on February 25th, where they will be briefed on preparations for the midterms. This email was signed by Kelly Hardiman, who identified herself as an FBI election executive, a position that apparently does not exist. Both statewide election official or administrators and former DOJ officials say they've never heard of such a conference call with state officials. Though, we'll talk about this later in the show. Maybe Diego Morales needs to get called into the office to learn a thing or two. Now, all of this comes at the same time when we're seeing states preparing for election malfeasance. In Maryland, the House there passed a gerrymandered 8-0 map. Now it's expected to die in the Senate, where leadership opposes it, but this comes in response to Republicans in places like Texas redrawing their maps in the middle of the census cycle to game the system and secure, theoretically, more Republican seats in Congress. Virginia Democrats are doing the same thing. They proposed a potential 10-1 congressional map for the 26 midterms. Now, voters there would need to approve a constitutional amendment in a special election. Currently, a bipartisan commission draws the state's maps. California went through the same thing last year. The legislature has passed a bill to put this question to voters, though Governor Abigail Spanberger has yet to sign it. The redistricting question there is also being argued in the courts. Now, Michelle, I hate to frame it this way, but with things like gerrymandering, at least, I think there should be some sort of federal minimum, at least, for the way our elections are conducted. Now, not the way Trump wants to do them, obviously. They want to take over elections. But I do think there needs to be some sort of federal guidance from a better, honest, not corrupt government in terms of what states are allowed to do along these lines. It's a race to the bottom, is it not?
I think so. I think the whole thing with gerrymandering, when you end up, where it's a manipulation of the voters and it's a manipulation of to actually remove certain people's voices. And so we end up where, again, we're creating a country where the best ideas don't have a chance to come to the top because those in power will want to hold power. And I also just want to name that this really is a states' rights versus federal that's going on. And even in how it's going to get played out in Indiana, the assumption was Indiana would have redistricted, and the Hoosier state said no. And so it's kind of put us in the crosshairs. And so now there's a lot of legislators, Republican legislators, that are being primaried because they've got people who want to align more with Trump and the federal kind of takeover of states' rights. So this is going to be a battle that we'll see actually probably more on the Republican side. I kind of feel like I'm grab the popcorn,
Yeah, it's certainly interesting. I mean, we and I don't know what the way to go is. I mean, obviously, listen, the Republicans in these states, Doc, are throwing a fit. They're saying this is undemocratic. They're saying this is a rigged map. Gee, how does it feel when the shoe's on the other foot? But only one party has proposed legislation at the federal level over the last couple of years that would ban gerrymandering, right?
So, yeah, the gerrymandering thing is really interesting. I happened to notice that a guy named Tim Swarens wrote a piece in the Indy Star in the last few days, and some people may remember that he was the editor of the Indianapolis Star years ago before the Star was bought up by USA Today. And Swarens was that was when it was Dan Quayle's family or Dan Quayle's wife's family owned the Indianapolis Star, and the Indianapolis Star was far more conservative than it is today. So I got to know Swarens slightly. I spent a little time with him one day, and he's a very conservative guy as leading the Indianapolis Star in a conservative way. So he writes an opinion piece that's published in the Star and also in other USA Today magazines talking about Mike Pence and how Pence is such a principled character. So, I get slightly nauseous when we talk about that. But he also wrote very favorably about Indiana having rejected redistricting. And so it's interesting, that's kind of becoming, so he's coming from a conservative Republican standpoint, and it's becoming, acceptable to say that we didn't do the redistricting, and that was really principled and really good. Now, I completely get it that I wish we had federal guidelines that were better. That mostly has been done really by the courts than legislation, about redistricting. But then, so I come back to this thing about the politics of it. I hate to see Virginia saying we're gonna get rid of our bipartisan committee to redistrict in order to do this thing. But then I think these are dangerous times, and so dangerous times require extreme measures sometimes.
Yeah, I mean, Michelle, you can't blame them, right? Like, I mean, I supported California doing what they're doing. I mean, you can't unilaterally surrender when the other side is threatening, is number one, stealing seats through their own gamesmanship, but then also threatening to put troops on the streets around election sites.
I think that's absolutely true. And again, it comes back to, what are we asking people? Let me just rephrase. Indiana, because I want to focus on Indiana. Indiana has like the lowest voter turnout. So the fact that we are embroiled in a conversation about we've got to protect election integrity and all of that, as though we have an overwhelming abundance of invisible, imaginary people voting. We can't get real people to vote. And I think that needs to be kind of focused on, and that all of this is a rhetoric to foment, again, distrust of an election system, distrust of our whole form of government. And I actually hear more and more people on the far right every day willing to give up one more right to protect the Trump regime. And at what point do people realize it's like, we have a democracy, we have representative government, and I think people need to step up and realize that if your representatives are not representing you, you've got to get involved. And the more that we get involved, and the more that we can actually name the things that, you know what, that is blanketly not true. My hope is that we do not have National Guards around our voting areas. I have been in so many counties where they do elections very well. Very, very well. And I think we need to start amplifying what is being done right, because the narrative that's happening is such a focus on what is being done wrong in other places, that our job in Indiana is to turn out voters this election cycle. That is our job.
Yeah, well, Doc, there seems to be a certain thing in common of the places that Trump accuses of running their elections badly. Gee, what could it be? Oh, they're all cities with a large number of minorities.
Yep. And Michelle, I just want to say that was a great statement you just made. And the idea that we can't get real people to vote, I love that phrase. But Scott, yeah, I mean, it is a horrible image to think about, armed thugs lurking around voting areas, and how that something like this might happen, because it is going to tremendously suppress people's votes, and particularly the people who are most afraid that they're going to somehow get picked up, going to get harassed. It's terrifying. I keep using the word terrifying a lot today.
It certainly is. It certainly is. So I guess I want to change direction a little bit. Now this is another one we've been following for months and months and months, and kind of back to the covering up corruption with scandal. Here's a scandal for you, perhaps the biggest one in the country's history. So, we know last week the Department of Justice released some 3 million pages of documents related to the late convicted pedophile and sex trafficker Jeffrey Epstein, right? Now, the New York Times found more than 38,000 references to Donald Trump in that tranche of files, which, according to Lad Bible, is actually more than twice as many times as the name Harry appears in the entire series of Harry Potter books. That's what you call a main character. Now, despite that, Deputy AG Todd Blanche says the review is over and there will be no further investigation. Democrats are vowing to fight this. Again, contrary to a law passed in November, overwhelmingly in the House and the Senate, and signed by President Trump, which called for the release of all relevant Epstein materials. Only half of the approximately 6 million pages of documents have been released, and those that have been released are covered in more than 10,000 redactions. Said redactions seem to be incomplete or haphazard, with the names of potential co-conspirators blacked out, while information identifying survivors was publicly available, at least until lawyers representing more than 200 victims filed suit in federal court. Maryland Representative Jamie Raskin said, quote, "We are witnessing a full-blown cover-up," while Epstein Files Transparency Act co-author Ro Khanna called this one of the largest scandals in our country's history. Now, about those redactions, so the Justice Department will allow lawmakers to see unredacted versions of these files beginning Monday, when members of Congress, without their staffers, will be able to review the unredacted files on computers at the DOJ, where they may take notes. They may not make copies, either physical or electronic. Okay, but that's still only half the files. Now, who were these other men? Who are these names who have been redacted? Well, Julie K. Brown, who has been all over this story at the Miami Herald. She is perhaps the preeminent journalist covering the Epstein scandal. Reports while there is no known client list kept by Epstein, the FBI last year did compile a summary of allegations against 11 men, including Trump, movie producer Harvey Weinstein, former Prince Andrew, attorney Alan Dershowitz, private equity investor Leon Black, Victoria's Secret founder Les Wexner, current Commerce Secretary Howard Lutnick, and former President Bill Clinton. Now, for the record, I got to state, many of the claims are not corroborated and were called into the FBI tip line or relayed secondhand. At least 2 of the men, though, were listed as having been referred to prosecutors, though they were never charged. And the very existence of this list contradicts sworn testimony FBI Director Kash Patel gave to Congress last year when he said Epstein only trafficked victims to himself. Now, one of those men we mentioned, former President Clinton, is making the case to testify publicly about this. House Oversight Committee Chairman James Comer of Kentucky subpoenaed both Bill and Hillary Clinton to testify before his committee, to which they have agreed after being threatened with contempt for previously failing to appear. Now, Bill Clinton followed his wife in calling for these hearings to be held publicly. They're scheduled to be held behind closed doors, though Comer says that video and transcripts will be made available. Michelle, you think those transcripts and video are going to be made available in there entirely or selectively edited to make the Clintons look bad? Again, not a fan of Bill Clinton myself. And if he is implicated in any sex trafficking or crimes against these women, he should rot. What say you?
I want justice done. I feel like we don't need 38 more thousand files to be released. We have testimony. At what point, I guess for me, I look at it as like, do we need more than 1 victim, 10 victims, 200 victims? At what point does that tipping point happen for people? And it really does enrage me many ways, because I feel like the Epstein files have now pivoted into almost a voyeuristic pursuit for many people. At the end of the day, if Bill Clinton is named, we have that investigation. Will it go through? Everybody says, well, yeah, he should be tried if he's in there. Will it? Will that happen? Will there be justice if it's somebody that's on our side? Or will that be the token piece of justice, but everything else gets hidden? I think at the end of the day, we have to stay laser focused on justice. And I do think it's brilliant when people name, like, okay, in Harry Potter, that name is mentioned so many times. You don't get mentioned as many times and have it be a nothing burger. But we have got to stay, the central character in this are the victims that also continue to happen, because this is a circle that is still present. And I think people seem to think that, Jeffrey Epstein's gone, it's not there. Oh, no. It is still very much there.
I mean, well, and we'll talk about this here in a little bit, but the connections to foreign intelligence are right there. I mean, this is a long-standing ring of human trafficking. Ghislaine Maxwell, Epstein's partner, and the only person who seems to be suffering any consequences, even though she got moved to a sweet club fed situation in Texas, her father, notorious international double, triple agent spy Robert Maxwell. He himself died under mysterious circumstances. Has a lot of connections to foreign intelligence and Russia and Israel and the UK. It's a big club, Doc, and you ain't in it.
Well, I have actually cleverly avoided using my influence with the administration and the Supreme Court and everybody. Luckily, my name has been always redacted from all the files, so I've been good at that. But seriously, I love the fact that John Ossoff, who's running for re-election in Georgia for the Senate, is using this term now called the Epstein class are the rulers of America. The Epstein class, the billionaire sex traffickers. It's the whole Epstein thing is so interesting because Trump's first response to it has always been delay, do everything you can to delay, but then, of course, that just builds the idea that he's got a lot to hide, and so this is the nightmare that he can't escape from. Is this going to be the crazy thing that brings him down? And the other piece of this that I read about last week is, now that people are talking about the Comer precedent, so that this Republican Comer is insisting on calling in the former president of the United States. That okay, well, there's going to be a new Congress coming up here next January. And if the Democrats do pull off what I believe they can and take over Congress, then they can subpoena everybody to come in and testify based on this Comer precedent that may be being set.
Yeah, well, well, again, if we have the free and fair elections based on our last stories, but Michelle's mentioned in the chat, and I want to get this on the record because it's fun to talk about. That, look, just having your name mentioned in the Epstein files isn't in and of itself necessarily an indication that you committed any wrongdoing. For example, Bernie Sanders is mentioned in the Epstein files, and he comes out of it smelling like a rose because Larry Summers was complaining to Epstein that his kids were a little bit too into Bernie. But you mentioned, Doc, the Epstein class, which I think is good framing by Ossoff, because you see certain names come up again and again, and it's people of a certain status. And let's talk about, it's the oligarchs, right? It's folks like, Epstein, billionaire, right? Larry Summers. I don't know if he was personally a billionaire, but this is a guy who's managed the economy, right? The dean at Harvard, very prominent person. And of course, the folks who are featured in this most prominently are other billionaires like Epstein, including Bill Gates, including Elon Musk. A couple of emails, apparently, that Epstein sent to himself contain allegations that Microsoft founder Bill Gates, once the richest man in the world, contracted an STD from, quote, Russian girls and sought to slip his then wife Melinda antibiotics surreptitiously. Now, Elon had previously denied spending significant time with Epstein, though the files show a thirsty Musk planning to visit Epstein's island in 2012 and asking when the wildest parties would be held. We mentioned wow, I almost said Nutlick. That's real slip of the tongue. Howard Lutnick was mentioned previously. And he's on record of denying any contact with Epstein after like 2005. Said the guy was a creep. Said I'm never going to associate it with him again. Well, there he is in the files, planning to visit Epstein at his island around the same time frame as Musk is doing. And the connections do not stop with American, or, well, in the case of Musk, South African billionaires and oligarchs. According to the Kyiv Independent, Polish Prime Minister Donald Tusk suggests Epstein may have been working with Russian intelligence and oligarchs. This last batch of files shows Epstein cultivating relationships with Russian officials, seeking a personal meeting with Vladimir Putin, being suspected of acting as a wealth manager for the Russian autocrat, as well as former Zimbabwean dictator Robert Mugabe. Epstein pitched the Russians on a way to leapfrog the West by reinventing the global finance system based on cryptocurrency. Kind of looks like what we're doing now with Trump and the Sheikh and the Liberty Financial. The files also show Epstein with an unusual number of highly placed Russians in his inner circle and dealings with aluminum oligarch Oleg Deripaska via former UK ambassador to the US, Peter Mandelson. Now, speaking of Mandelson, it's funny that, while the American folks that are named in this are generally getting off scot-free, figures in Europe are at least starting to pay some consequences. A while back, we mentioned Andrew Mountbatten Windsor, the disgraced former prince, having been stripped of his title. Mandelson was fired from his post as ambassador and could go to prison. Prime Minister Keir Starmer's leadership is in question over having appointed Mandelson. You've got Swedish and Slovakian officials that have been forced to resign. A slew of Norwegians, including former Prime Minister Thorbjorn Jagland, have come under scrutiny. Now, not necessarily Epstein related, but oligarch billionaire related, and consequences in Europe. French police this week raided the offices of the former Twitter, aka X, raiding the offices of Elon Musk's platform on Tuesday and summoning Elon for questioning as part of a cybercrime investigation. XAI and its Grok chatbot have come under fire for producing sexually explicit deepfakes, including of minors. X has also come up against French anti-Semitism laws for spreading disinformation about the Holocaust. And on another billionaire note, Jeff Bezos is killing the Washington Post. On Wednesday, employees were told on a Zoom call that the paper's staff would be cut by a third, with the sports desk, climate desk, and book section shuttered entirely, while the DC Metro and international desks would be reduced significantly. At least one reporter was laid off in the middle of a war zone. Now, Bezos bought the Post for $250 million in 2013, generally kept a hands-off approach for a while there, and was regarded as having saved the paper, which is losing money hand over fist. But if making money was the concern, why did Bezos pay $75 million to acquire and market this terrible Melania documentary, which was directed by another Epstein Files cast member, Brett Ratner? Bezos reportedly personally spiked the paper's planned endorsement of Kamala Harris in 2024, leading to 300,000 subscription cancellations. Last February, the Amazon CEO also announced a new rightward direction for the opinion section, resulting in another 75,000 cancellations. G. Michelle, on this matter of the Post, like, the Eric Andre meme, where he shoots the guy and then says, why would they do this? Well, it's Jeff Bezos killing the Washington Post, bleeding subscribers, losing money, and then wondering why he's losing money. Oh, man, I know I need to fire a bunch of people.
Private equity be private equity? I mean, like, we see it on Main Street all the time. Private equity takes over a successful business and ends up selling it for scraps, makes money on both ends of the transaction in one way or another, gains more power. So I'm not surprised. I don't think there was ever any intent to make the Washington Post be a the pillar of journalistic integrity under his watch. I think it's another way of controlling the narrative. But I will say, when it comes to the oligarchs and all that, we are still, we talk about this all the time in organizing. Power is organized money and organized people. And right now, we are witnessing the power of organized money, probably like never before. Where, this is where I love listening to historians, because they are going to connect the dots. Throughout history, we have always had the organized money, and to a certain extent, organized people through military, and industry, consolidate power. What we are championing is the rise of organized people at the grassroots level all the way up. And again, we're starting to see that happen with boycotting of industry, with censure of elected officials, and so to me, that gives me hope. Is how are we seeing organized people rise up? We need to be amplifying those stories. Again, the oligarchs, there are no guardrails for them. And you don't get to be a billionaire because you practice self-restraint. So everything that they are doing is a consolidation and a consuming. We should not be surprised, but we do need to get engaged at whatever level we can to be the organized people.
Doc, what do you make of Europe handling this better than us? Is it their, Michelle talked about listening to the historians. Is it their long history of oligarchs, kings, aristocrats, organized wealth, running things, and that maybe they understand the consequences of that better?
That's a really interesting question, because the Europeans, when I was fairly young, I ended up going to Europe because I had cousins who lived in England, and spent a little bit of time in France. And this was in the 1960s, and there was still so much visible destruction from World War II. That you could just see, which I'd never seen in the United States. So the Europeans, the generations of people in Europe have a much clearer sense of the problems of countries run amok because leadership goes in the wrong direction, or kings or Führers or whoever. But on the other hand, they've also got this sense of we're stronger together than we are apart. And they put together, there's NATO, which is one story, but the European Common Market. So I've got a lot of respect for how the Europeans are trying to come to grips with this. They've also pushed back, antitrust in the European Union against the big against Google in particular. So, I don't know that exactly how many lessons there are for us to specifically apply, but it is inspiring how in some ways they're trying to do the right thing, and they're watching in terror. Here I am with the word terror again. The United States is coming apart, but we're still seeing that in the stuff we see out of the Italian, from the Olympics, that people are booing the U.S. government, but still cheering the American athletes and people.
Yeah, it's funny. Well, you wouldn't know they were booing if you watched it on NBC here. Apparently, they throttled that. They didn't want the folks to see that J.D. Vance was getting a round, of the Bronx cheer, right? Like they, and which is again, right? That's the corporations, that's the billionaires, that's the oligarchs. That's why we need things like independent media ventures like this one. Hit that subscribe button. Hit us up with the paid subscription if you can. Anyway,
Scott, let me just correct you for a second.
Please.
You work really hard. You really work hard. You have put together. So you're doing these. You're leading us, and you're asking our responses to these. You gathered all this data and analyzed it and boiled it down, and I'm impressed with your work, and I want to just say that out loud.
Oh, you're going to make me blush, Doc. So hey, we're coming up on an hour here, and look at us, we're running on time today. So hey, good job, team. Let's hear it for ourselves, because normally I'm about 10 minutes behind at this point in the show, and that's good because we actually have a lot of Indiana news to talk about this week. But let's start at the crossroads of Indiana news and national news. So, we were just talking about the Epstein files. Well, there's a couple Indiana connections in here. Hoosier Lemon mentions in our chat over at progressiveindiana.net that Evan Bayh is in the Epstein files, not necessarily because he did anything wrong, but boy, he's been working for Apollo Global Management as a senior advisor for the last 15 years. Who's the head of Apollo Global Management? Well, it used to be Leon Black, one of those 11 people in the files, precisely. And that doesn't even get into Mark Rowan, one of the other principals at Apollo, and his involvement in shady things. We talked about that a couple weeks ago, and we'll continue to. Now, also, turns out the Epstein files contain a couple of emails from researchers at IU's Kinsey Institute. The current head of the institute, Justin Garcia, sent a single email to Epstein in 2012 while reaching out to agencies and foundations for funding. Epstein was a known supporter of scientific research. Garcia says he only learned of Epstein's criminal history later. Now, another Kinsey researcher, anthropologist Helen Fisher, met with Epstein at least 3 times, including a dinner with Woody Allen and a lunch with former Obama White House counsel Kathy Rumler and potentially former Israeli Prime Minister Ehud Barak. Didn't even talk about the various other international stories this week and Epstein's connection to Barak. But Fisher was a courtesy appointment at Kinsey, meaning she was not a salaried IU employee. She passed away in 2024. Inevitably, these passing mentions of Kinsey in the Epstein files, you see Republicans already teeing up to use this to further attack the controversial Sex Research Institute. Indiana Republicans are also up to their own shady business, partnering with Charlie Kirk's Turning Point USA to expand the presence in Indiana schools. In a interview with Fox News on Wednesday, Kirk's widow Erica said Indiana would join a list of red states that have partnerships with Turning Point, the Christian nationalist grooming organization. This during a Fox News interview. Indiana has 38 collegiate and 64 high school chapters already. Now, state promotion of this organization would certainly run into First Amendment concerns. At least I think so. Students are already allowed to start chapters. Schools would not be mandated to create new ones and are already prohibited from discriminating against student clubs based on viewpoint. Turning Point USA and their high school arm, Club America, have had a hard time obtaining faculty sponsors and overcoming student disapproval. Now, speaking of students in Indiana high schools, lots of protests this week. Indianapolis, in Michiana, in Fort Wayne, in Lafayette, down in southern Indiana, across the river from Louisville, up in the Northwest Indiana region. I've got stories in our show notes, which will be available on Progressive Indiana Network from throughout the state. Now, Indiana lawmakers have obviously, predictably come down and pick sides on this, with Lieutenant Governor Micah Beckwith going to Twitter to complain, which he does frequently, this time about these protests, while Congressman Andre Carson touted the students' right to engage in political dissent. Another story about the congressman, which I wanted to highlight this week in the Indy Star. Apparently his office helped a Haitian-born U.S. citizen with an ordeal procuring paperwork from their native Haiti. Rude Moret, a Haitian-born U.S. citizen, took his 3-year-old son back to Port-au-Prince in December to procure paperwork from the U.S. Embassy. Quite an ordeal. Read the Indy Star article if you can. There's a lot there, but the pair was stuck in the Capitol for nearly 2 weeks as violence in the city blocked their route, closed the embassy, and kept pushing their appointment back. The Star profiles how the representative's office helped the family navigate the situation. Michelle, I don't know what their catch is your eye at the crossroads of Indiana and national?
I think what I'm actually watching closely is what legislation will come forward to prevent student First Amendment rights. I think that there is a weaponization from our Attorney General targeting schools that have had the student protests, and at the same time, they'll quite happily celebrate Turning Point doing a counter protest. And so there is just a complete double standard. And it occurs to me too, this mindset of, oh, well, if you just protested the right way, whatever that right way is, right? At the end of the day, we are seeing a rise in Christian nationalism. I have long said that in Indiana, Christian nationalism will be the bigger threat than probably anything else, mostly because, again, naming in our rural spaces, we've lost a lot of third spaces for meetings. And so it really is our churches that are organically organizing people. And if those churches are led by pastors who are part of the Turning Point Network, they are all receiving the same talking points. And I cannot stress enough that if you are hearing those same three messages everywhere you go, it will influence what you believe. And they're very effective at messaging. I also just want to say one thing that is lacking across the board in our schools is we have not really taught healthy debate. And I want to say Turning Point has done that very well. And what they are doing in their clubs is teaching people, obviously with their values, teaching them how to debate those values. And so what is happening is you will have a subset of people who present themselves very well, and then another group that is being emotionally engaged in something. And so the optics, and I cannot stress this enough, protest is an optics. It is an optics. So if one side looks disciplined and has a same message, and the other side is coming out with 5 different signs and an emotive, the media is going to have a feeding frenzy on that. And so we really do need groups that can come in and just continue to help stress discipline protests in the messaging.
Doc, you, if I remember last time you were here, you brought up your student days, which were, kind of around the same time as the Vietnam War. Do you get the same sort of vibes from what's going on now? I mean, that was like, I think the high point of student protest in this country. Are we beginning to see that sort of critical mass build? Are we there yet? What do you think?
I think it's really interesting because many of us who've been going to No Kings and 50501 rallies and stuff have bemoaned that too many people there have gray hair like me, and that it's the oldsters who are the ones getting out. And now we're seeing that shift age-wise, and I think it's really good. But Michelle gives some make some important points too, that there needs to be some care to have unified messaging and not appear too crazy. So it's a complicated business, this, managing the optics, but the basic optics of students speaking up is really good. I want to just also touch back on the Kinsey Institute, because I'm worried about what's going to happen on the college campus too. I've heard a lot of college students talk about that they're afraid to speak up on the IU campus because of the sense that they're going to be retaliated against. And I remember how important the leadership at the top was back in the 60s with Herman B. Wells in terms of civil rights and in terms of supporting students' right to protest, even if he didn't necessarily agree with some of the things the students were protesting in terms of the Vietnam War. And I'm worried about our leadership of our Bloomington campus and IU. And I just hope that all students are going to feel safe to speak up and to make some noise, make some good trouble.
Yeah, no, I mean you're right. I mean, I know students at IU who are afraid to speak out on certain things for fear of running up against the Witten regime, as it were, and you wonder how much they support institutes like Kinsey, who, for all their controversy, have done very important, groundbreaking work right here at IU. According to Micah Beckwith, Kinsey is actually, and I shit you not, a demonic portal to hell. Yeah. So, let's move on and talk about another demonic portal to hell, Secretary of State Diego Morales' office. So this week was the filing deadline. That was Friday at noon for folks to claim their intent to run for office here in the state of Indiana. Now, that was thrown into chaos because a very minor but important technical mistake was made by Morales. Abdul Hakim Shabazz had this at Indy Politics. So more than 300 candidates who filed to run directly with his office had to scramble to rectify a technical defect with their paperwork. There were questions as to whether employees in the secretary's office were properly authorized to administer the oath. Now, one person who will not be running this year is Jennifer Ruth Green, who challenged incumbent Congressman Frank Mervan up in the 1st District a couple years ago. She blamed the State House Republicans for failing to pass the gerrymandered maps during December's special session. So, if you can't rig the map for me, it's too difficult. I'm not even going to bother. And another person who you will not be seeing on the ballot this year is Republican State Rep Ed Clare from New Albany. We talked about this last week when he announced he is not seeking re-election and will instead run for mayor of New Albany next year as an independent, citing the party's far-right turn under Trump. Well, for that, his House Republican colleagues responded by kicking him out of their caucus on Monday. Let's pause here. And Michelle, you are intimately familiar with the consequences of Diego's mistake. Do you want to fill us in with what happened?
Sure. So January 7th, we brought in about 24 candidates that were with the Rural Summit to file. And we intentionally did a press conference outside the Secretary of State office. And our plan was to have a photo op there. We had a few of our candidates actually file their paperwork with the Secretary of State. Normally, Democrats go over to the Elections Division, and that's where they file. However, found out last week, along with everybody else, that there was in question a possibility that when they had to sign their documents and that gets notarized, the person who witnesses it may not have been a notary. And so I had to scramble and contact the handful of our candidates that had filed and have them go back to the State House and go to the Election Division to file again. So it's an administrative issue that was an inconvenience. But again, when you are organizing rural candidates for whom just stepping out to do this can feel intimidating and overwhelming, not to mention the 2 or 3 hour drive that some people have to make to say, oh, and you have to go back because the Secretary of State's office didn't do something right. is beyond frustrating. And I also want to name that I think for too long, because there has not been really, how do I say this? We have cracks in the structure that we have learned to bypass, meaning Democrats go to the election division. We don't even deal with the Secretary of State office for filing. That works, but it also does not actually address a systemic issue that might be there, which is that the Secretary of State's office for far too long cannot be trusted to do the very job that they are elected to do. And so, if anything, the Rural Summit stress test something. And we kind of laugh about it because I feel like maybe this would have been internally held by the Republicans. They would have quietly fixed whatever the issue was. But because, like Scooby Doo, those damn kids showed up, it ended up becoming a bigger issue than what they probably hoped it would have been.
Doc, does this sound like malice or incompetence?
Maybe equal parts of both. Morales is certainly capable of both. And so I don't know, but Michelle, I'm just so impressed about the work you are doing, and I'd missed this complete story until I looked at the notes that you sent out before the show, and so it is these creative ways to make points and demonstrate the truth. This is really important work that you all are doing. And also, I want to stop and talk about Ed Clear a little bit. He's an amazing man who, from the southern part of the state. And when way back in 2012, when our group, Medicare for All Indiana, was heavily involved in the coalition trying to build support for the state to move to accept the Medicaid expansion. Remember that Medicaid expansion was part of the Affordable Care Act. Essentially all red states across the country, including Governor Pence, announced that they would not do anything that would in any way cooperate with the dreaded Obamacare, and they would not expand Medicaid, but with key help from Ed Clear on the Republican side, and a lot of work from our coalition and a lot of work with the Indiana Hospital Association. We got the Medicaid expansion, although we called it HIP 2.0. It was never called Medicaid expansion. It was called recreating Medicaid. But anyway, it was a tremendous victory. There was a lot of citizen coalition building. We took 10,000 signatures. Talk about, some optics. We took a stack of 10,000 petitions and put them on Pence's desk, and there was some pretty good publicity. And I hammed it up a little bit by wearing my white coat, my doctor coat. But
do what you got to do.
Yeah, you got to do what you got to do. But it was a heartening thing, because even on the Democratic side, people were saying, "Oh, we'll never get the Medicaid expansion," and we did it. So, and Ed Clear played a big role in that. So, I really want to shout out to Ed Clear. He has done great work within the Republican Party in Indiana for a long time, and I guess maybe he's earned a break.
Yeah, well, it's good to see there's still some good ones out there. And again, Claire's probably somebody who we're going to disagree with on a whole lot of things. But at least, the man has a spine, real profiles and courage there versus Michelle, if you want to compare Claire to Jennifer Ruth Green and her profile in cowardice.
Yeah, agreed.
So listen, let's look at the other side of the aisle, and a lot of excitement, I think, in Indiana on the Democratic side this year, which is a bit unusual in a way. So we mentioned Carson a little bit ago. Well, he picked up a prominent primary challenger in the form of two-time statewide candidate Destiny Wells, who filed just before the deadline to run for his 7th congressional district seat. Carson was already getting a bit of a push from another candidate, George Hornado. So that makes this at least a three-way race. There may be other candidates involved, but that's three folks who are going to be well-funded and relatively prominent. Briefly going back to the Republicans, 5 of the GOP senators who voted against redistricting also find themselves with primary challengers. Now, back to Wells, she posted on Facebook Thursday that Indiana Democrats will be fielding a candidate in all 25 state Senate seats up for re-election this year for the first time since 1974. And additionally, on the House side, Democrats are running in 90-plus state House races this year, up significantly from recent cycles. And Michelle, again, a lot of those state House seats, those are folks affiliated with the Indiana Rural Summit.
We are super, super excited and proud to have. When I last looked, I think it was 91 House seats, and we know of at least one more that's coming. And then there's a very, very good chance that they'll caucus in the remaining. And so our goal with the Rural Summit was we wanted to have every House race contested. This year we brought in the Senate knowing that they were going to try to contest all 25 seats. So we're very excited that that has happened. And again, just to reiterate, we have in many, many of our counties, nobody running on the Democratic platform down ballot. And so when you are wanting people to turn out for a general election, if there's nobody that they can really vote for, it again depresses turnout. And so part of our mission is to give every rural and small town Hoosier a voice, a choice, and a vote. And I feel like we are very much moving forward in that and supporting candidates in whichever way that we can, particularly the ones that are in these rural districts. We look at it as we've got our candidates that are on the offense team. These are the swing districts, the flippable seats. That will be the state party really supporting them. But we have our defense team. And again, I want to just name many of their opponents are the ones that submit harmful bills. And because there's nobody that has run to oppose them, we cannot get messaging out to say, hey, this is a bad thing. Therefore, their constituents never call to say, vote yes or no. And they hide behind that. They are able to honestly say, well, none of my constituents have called to say this is a bad bill. Well, that's our job. We're trying to get the message out and mobilize constituents to hold their electeds accountable and then vote in somebody different.
Doc, what do you make of Ms. Wells jumping into that race for Congressman Carson's seat? He's been there since, I want to say like 2008 or so. It's been a hot minute. I spoke with Mr. Hornado last year around this time. He's a figure who gets a lot of pushback on the left for various reasons. Now, that was already a contested race. Now we've got a three-way race. I think there's going to be a lot of money thrown around in this thing. What do you make of that one in particular?
I actually had only heard about her entering that race just today, and I'm a little confused and bamboozled, and I don't want to speak against Destiny Wells shaking things up. I met her several times, and she's a woman who's not afraid to shake things up. But on the other hand, Andre has been a stalwart. I see everything, not everything, but I tend to see everything in view of healthcare. And Andre has been a longtime supporter of Medicare for All and that kind of universal healthcare reform that I support. And his predecessor, his grandmother, Julia Carson, she was a longtime supporter of Medicare for All. So, I really like Andre, but it never hurts to shake anybody up a little bit.
I will say this. So, I mean, the primary criticism, and you're absolutely right. Congressman Carson's voting record, at least for me, spectacular.
Yeah.
His ability to turn out Marion County, Not so great. That needs to
point.
be the especially in big statewide races. We need Marion County to turn out. Marion County Democratic Party is a goddamn dumpster fire. So I don't know, and I think that was Mr. Hornado's primary concern, and I think Destiny Wells is sort of echoing that same concern, and she says she's got a plan to turn out Marion County. Michelle, I want to get your thoughts on this one too.
Again, voter turnout is voter turnout is voter turnout. And I feel like there's sometimes where I struggle with primaries for the Democratic Party simply because we oftentimes lack the power to really be able to hold that well. However, in the case of Marion County, all three bring in a completely different voter block, right? And so together, I feel like it creates the energy, the conversation, the accountability, all of that if they do it well. And at the end of the day, this is about having the best candidate, the best platform moving forward that will win in the general election. And I think anytime we have a situation that is engaging new voters and and voters who may be brand new to register or the ones that have been disengaged, we will win if they get involved. So beyond that, I don't live in Marion County. I often say, it's not my what do they say? The term is not my circus, not my monkeys, right? I got enough to deal with trying to get rural voters to turn out. So, but we need Marion County, and I cannot stress that enough. If Marion County shows up, and I also want to just use this moment to plug a shared thing that we're dealing with, Marion County and rural, is data centers. And so when we talk about that, find the issues that align. It could be healthcare deserts. It could be housing concerns. Whatever those issues are, when we can start to align across those issues, bridging that urban rural, and then connecting how is federal impacting the state, impacting the local, all the better. So I'm looking forward to hearing their debates because they will be able to bring in some of those, connect those dots for voters that may not be in other spaces.
Yeah, that's called foreshadowing. We're going to talk about data
Oh, yeah.
centers in Indianapolis here just a little bit. But Michelle, I did want to mention one more thing. Some of these races, we had the filing deadline. There's actually, for the handful of Democratic state house races, there's actually a bunch that have contested primaries.
Yeah.
The folks that lose those primaries, maybe they want to scatter to some of those down ballot races that you mentioned that, for as much as we highlighted the increase in participation and having all the Senate races filled and having all these, 90 plus House races going contested, there are still, a lot of empty spots on ballots lower down. So maybe these folks can jump into those. I want to say it's like a July 4 deadline, maybe, for folks to be caucused in.
Yeah. I honestly can't not remember the exact date, but I do want to name too. So when the Indiana Rural Summit formed in 2024, we formed after the primary. So this is the first time that we've actually ever had candidates, and we have several in the Rural Summit that they're primarying each other. And our philosophy is we are there to support candidates across the board. If a candidate is in a primaried race, then we don't endorse them before the primary election, but we are supporting them both in their running for office, and if their values and their platform aligns with ours around rural and small town, then we will definitely be amplifying that. At the same time, I am a firm believer that if you are in a primaried race, use that strategically to turnout base and to realize and make a plan. Like if you're doing town halls, use those to debate one another so that you're conserving your resources and because your primary is Democrats. That's who you're talking to. So the ways of bringing those Democrats in and having those conversations and realizing everybody's got a different view and a different priority, but we've got to get these conversations happening in a strategic way, and then do not do the churn and burn. Don't run for office and then disappear afterwards. Plug in. We have candidates that have already made an agreement between them that the one that wins, the other will support, and vice versa. To me, that's how you do this. Or you have a plan to run and get caucused into another role, but do not disappear.
Yeah, absolutely. So let's and just for the record, if these candidates would love to engage in some sort of virtual debate, perhaps on the Progressive Indiana Network, we would
Be great.
love to have you. Now, speaking of things on the Progressive Indiana Network, I am going to be back this afternoon at 2 o'clock with Katie Rector from Mad Voters to talk about legislation that's been moving this week at the Indiana State House. What's passed, what's out of committee, what's going to the full floor, what has died. We're going to be talking about that at 2 o'clock on very many of these same here channels. Now, but let's talk about the legislation just a little bit here, though, amongst ourselves. A couple things I did want to point out. So, from the Indiana Capitol Chronicle, this revamped immigration crackdown proposed by Liz Brown has passed out of committee. She is running to her right, trying to fend off challengers of her own, come under fire from Jim Banks and Todd Rokita for not being far right enough. Also, the House is pushing board consolidations, and there are lawsuit limits in the Senate. Opponents of these two separate measures raise concern over the cultural commissions, and there was a bill in the Senate that had to do with frivolous lawsuits, let's say. So maybe Katie and I will talk about those. Additionally, one thing Katie and I have been talking about is this bill proposing that the 10 Commandments be posted in schools all across the state. Well, that bill is dead. Thank goodness. Other bills that have died this week include a social media limits for teens, a bill to regulate cannabis, and also the one proposed by Mitch Gore that would ban state officials from purchasing luxury vehicles on the state dime. That bill unfortunately died. One that I did want to highlight here, since I've got you, Michelle, because I know you've been following this one, had to do with agricultural or rural development. Now, this bill is reportedly on the verge of being dead. It passed the House a few days ago, was set to be heard in the Senate, but it may not last long there. Critics pointed to the language in this bill that limited public input and local government control on agricultural land development. You know, the kinds of things people wanted to put in there, things like solar farms, things like data centers, which you mentioned previously. Michelle, what do you know about that bill, and can you tell me more? Is it dead, or is this thing going to exist with some sort of zombie legislation or language? That's another thing Katie and I have talked about before. Sometimes when these bills are dead, they're not really dead.
So what I understand, and Katie will know far more than I do because she's in the weeds with it, but House Bill 1333 was dealing with basically in reclassifying certain agricultural land and having it be available for developers. You're right to say it was removing local control, because that was the issue. It's that a developer could come in, it's already been deemed, this type of agricultural thing, they can turn around and buy it, and there could not be any zoning to change how it's used. The flex that they were using was it was going to offer, I believe it was 1% tax back into the local community. So again, the Republicans are really good about, oh, look at, we're gonna give you a crumb of something. but it's always at the expense of local control. And we cannot stress that enough, that you start to look at these pieces of legislation, and we look at it as if you were to have a report card with every one of these bills and start to just go, does it give life, liberty, or pursuit of happiness? And then just start putting your check marks next to them. And you're going to find that the largest number of bills that would have benefited life, liberty, and pursuit of happiness never made it out of committee. Many of them never even got a hearing in committee. And I'm talking to you, Eric Cook, and the Utilities Committee. But the other ones that are bad seem to sail through. And this was one of those that was starting to sail through. And then there were meetings that were happening with senators and calls being made. And it looks like it is the Senate that is stopping it and going, again, back to local control. I cannot stress enough that if we can start to amplify that, we've got legislators, they live locally. Everybody has a house somewhere. And at the end of the day, that zoning ordinance does make a difference to people. I also want to flag, and this is a dot that I have not fully connected, but it is alarming. I was reading the thing again about these detention centers, right? And where they're going to put these warehouses. And interestingly enough, the language was the same around this 1% tax. That's what flagged it for me. So if they had passed this bill and you could put anything anywhere without any ordinance, like it almost feels like, were they trying to test this bill? We are thinking data center, oil refinery, as Representative Matt Pierce said, but what if it meant detention center? Like, I think we need to be really thinking and be very acutely aware that there is an industry that is making a ton of money at our expense. And this is where having these conversations, getting involved with Mad Voters, getting involved with Citizens Action Coalition to understand, like, the villain in a lot of these are, I'm sorry to say, it's the private equity owned utility companies. They're the ones that say, hey, we recommend this land because that's where they actually have wires and infrastructure. They make money off of the infrastructure. They make money every step of the way. And it all starts with local control being removed.
Oh, the private equity ghouls from the first half of the show, from the Epstein files. It's the Epstein class. They're not just screwing minors, they're screwing all of us.
Yep.
Doc, though, so listen, I mean, like, some good news out of the State House this week. Like, there's some bad stuff moving along. It's not final yet. There's still opportunities to contact our legislators. Katie and I will talk about that here a little later this afternoon. But, like, I guess good news that some bad bills are dying. Yeah.
Yeah. Although, it's frankly a little sad to think that, the 10 Commandments is posting it, but that's an old horse that's been beaten so many times. And so, of course, the 10 Commandments should not be posted in every school. It's ridiculous and anti-constitutional. There's still a lot of bad stuff going on. And I think we'll talk a little bit about healthcare coming up here, but the cuts to Medicaid are awful. And the legislature is continuing to not take really taking care of Hoosiers. The life, liberty, pursuit of happiness, and health is a part of that. So I'm still really worried that we're going to end up net worse off health-wise in terms of this legislative session.
And Scott,
seems like they always do. Go ahead, Michelle. Yes.
The one thought that I had with the 10 Commandments thing is, I was waiting, where was the golden rule law, right? And I don't joke about that, because every religion has some variation of it. And so there's a part of me that I'm like, we need to think defensively, because if you actually propose a golden rule and then they turn around and vote no on it, now you actually are having the conversation that needs to be had. what's happened now is they can follow and do the whole victim thing of, well, we didn't get our 10 commandments, and we've played into the Christian nationalist rubric that they want us to. So that's the only part where I'm like, we got to start thinking smarter on some of these things.
Go on offense on that sort of
Thank
thing.
you.
Yeah, I
Yeah.
like it. I like
Yeah.
the way you're thinking. Yeah. So let's stay in the state capitol, and not the building, but the city of Indianapolis, and talk about a couple things now. We mentioned the data centers, right? So this week, hundreds of residents gathered and pressed this Metro Blocks company that wants to put a data center in the Martindale Brightwood area, a historically black neighborhood. Now, the folks in Pike Township won their data center fight, at least for now. That's according to Mirror Indy. I do also need to mention this week that Tanya Terry was sworn in as the first female police chief of IMPD. But Michelle, I want to talk about those data centers, and thread that needle, So they're trying to put these in, historically black neighborhoods, areas that have seen disinvestment for a long time. You've been tracking, and your candidates in the rural summit are following all these data centers proposals in rural areas. This is, how do we get the rural folks and the folks in the cities to see themselves on the same side, and then turn that into electoral and then legislative success?
So this is already happening. I would say that across the state, data centers are the fight that people are stepping into, and across the entire political spectrum, people are coming together and organizing. And this is where groups like, again, Citizens Action Coalition, and I understand Hoosier Action is also taking on this statewide fight. So this is great, because in both of those cases, these are nonpartisan organizations that are about mobilizing people, training local leaders, and really giving them the tools to advocate for themselves. This is one of those moments where it's like, if it's not, it couldn't be about us without us, right? And I feel like while everything has been happening hyper local, because that's where the attacks happen, that now people are starting to make those connections and build those relationships. Again, you'll hear me a lot of times talk about, we are building a mycelium network in Indiana around organizing. And this is one of those fights that is helping us find not only who are the communities that are directly impacted, but who are the allies. And the more that we are sharing and amplifying stories and helping people get connected to the right tools and groups, the stronger we will be to fight back.
100%. Dr. Rob, what do you think? Listen, I'm not going to ask you about the Indianapolis police chief. That's probably out of anything you've been paying attention to. Don't want to do that to you. I'm going to ask you about data centers too. Connect those dots for us.
Well, I love the phrase, the mycelium network that Michelle's working on. And for people who don't understand that, that refers to the soil and to the microorganisms that live in the soil and the networks that they create that support all plant life, meaning all life. And what do they all need? They need water, just like data centers. Data centers need so much water. And it's an incredible thing that, Indiana has, we can't give all our water to the data centers because the data centers benefit who? The Epstein class, the private equity class. And these big buildings are going to have, they're going to use a lot of electricity and a lot of water, but they're not going to create jobs. So it's just, it's the data centers. The only good thing about the data centers is that they've gotten all this hyperlocal approach, support and attention. And so they become a way to organize and then to connect the dots from community to community. The only good thing I can see about them is that they become a really good thing to organize. In environmental organizing, sometimes people tend to kind of speak poorly or disparagingly about NIMBYs, not in my backyard. Oh, now you become an environmental activist because you've got a trash dump in your backyard. Well, now you become an activist because there's a data center going to be in your backyard. So there's nothing wrong with being a NIMBY. Whatever it takes to wake people up, then and then can start connecting how these dots all because the people on the one hand and people like the Epstein class on the other, these contrasts are pretty sharp when you draw them.
The other thing I want to say is that the Rural Summit, we look at, because we work across gerrymandered lines, these artificial constructs, right? So a lot of our counties are divided between congressional districts, House districts, all of that. One of the things, though, the map that we want to also add into our layer is watersheds.
Yes.
Because watersheds connect at a completely different level. And one of the things that I am learning is that when we have a watershed that is feeding into an aquifer, and that aquifer is connecting here, here, and here. And then you can look on a map and go, oh, they want to put a data center here, and then they want to do a water treatment plant over here, and they want to do a small modular nuclear reactor here. Mm-hmm. They're all different ways of consuming water and returning water to the watershed. And one of the big things that I've learned recently is that if you remove water from one watershed, it goes to a water treatment center and then gets returned back, but it doesn't get returned back to the same watershed. You're actually losing water that would be then going downstream to the next thing. And when we do not have these groups, and whether they be electeds or developers or whatever, in conversation about what the actual water demands are, we're losing this big picture. And I think the one thing that the data center fight is highlighting is that, again, in our hyper individualistic society, we keep thinking that this community and their data center is all just local. Well, that data center is impacting the water that comes further downstream. So the people who live 30, 40 miles away might have a thing to say about it and might be worth organizing with the people who are at ground zero. And so that's one of the things that we're doing. Right?
They're certainly affecting your electric bill too.
Oh my gosh, yes.
They're ridiculous this year. Here's a dot that I'm going to connect that I didn't think that we would be connecting. So moving on to healthcare, got to cover a couple of these since we have Dr. Rob here with us. But Doc, listen, every time I book you on one of these shows, another rural hospital closes its obstetrics department. So this week we found out that Johnson Memorial Health, that's in Franklin, is closing its maternity unit. Last time you were here in December, I think we talked about the Greene County Hospital closing its obstetrics department. Also in healthcare news this week, Indiana is the fourth. It saw the fourth highest drop in Obamacare enrollees after the subsidies expired at the end of the year. Doc, what's going on?
Ouch. Yeah. The bad news is not going to stop coming in about healthcare because all these things have implications down the road. So closing the maternity unit in Franklin is a tragedy for Franklin and the area around that in Johnson County, and it's maybe not so bad a problem for the people who live on the Indianapolis side of Johnson County, but the people who live south of Franklin, they're gonna have to travel so far to get maternal prenatal care and to deliver. And the Morgan County hospital stopped doing OB several years ago. And all of this stuff then is going, it's one thing to think about a pregnant woman having to travel half an hour in active labor to get to a place to deliver. And now now they're going to travel for an hour and a half. And I just kind of I mean, I'm a guy, and I still tighten up viscerally thinking about how horrible that is. But then, and maybe I talked about this last time with the Linton Hospital, the Greene County Hospital, but the prenatal care issue is such a problem too. So if you've got to travel an hour and a half to get prenatal care, and you got to be there for the appointment and then an hour and a half back. And that means you probably need childcare for that whole time, and the transportation issues. And all of these things end up in worsening our infant mortality, the number of babies who die, and our maternal mortality, both of which Indiana ranks terribly at. Lots of women die related to childhood. Lots of children, infants die in infancy because of the problems in Indiana. And so why are the hospitals closing their OB units? Well, the dots keep connecting, partly because of what the way healthcare is financed, and partly because of the influence of private equity and consolidations of hospital chains, and everybody's just seeking how to extract money out of healthcare. Healthcare is extractive industry like mining and lumbering, because there's money to be gotten out of it, and OB is not profitable. Obstetrics is not so profitable, and it's not so profitable because we leave Medicaid to be the primary way that pays for obstetrics, and Medicaid is being cut. It reimburses poorly to start with. I mean, all this stuff comes back to the overarching problems of private equity and the Epstein class extracting money wherever they can, and on the other end, Hoosiers trying to have babies and keep our species going. It's really tragic. And then I'll just sidestep then to the Obamacare thing. So these are the Obamacare subsidies as part of the Affordable Care Act, the marketplace. And so we've seen I know lots of people, including Michelle's family, who've really struggled with the increases in the cost of healthcare. So what happens then is that the healthiest people decide, I can't afford healthcare. I think I'm going to be healthy this year, so I'm not going to buy health insurance. But then they risk so much tragedy, including financial ruin, because of medical bills. So it's just one thing after another. We got to fix all this.
Well, and if I can
Please.
also say two things. One, when we did the motorcade for Medicaid last year, we intentionally drove to 3 hospitals that were at risk of closing either a particular service or altogether, right? And just in that action of realizing you get on these back roads and stuff, trying to figure out navigating roads works, trying to navigate just directions while you're in, I can't even imagine being in active labor or a stroke patient where time is everything. Like this is what we are putting on people, and not adequately even talking about that. When I listen to the conversations at the State House with regard to healthcare, it is always from this financial bottom line, as though they are surprised people need healthcare. I am shocked and horrified. Like, are you not looking at the demographics? If you have an aging population in one area, you're going to need more healthcare. If you have more children being born, you're going to need more healthcare, right? So it baffles me. But then the other interesting thing too is we don't have, like, I really feel like we're going to have to be able to navigate. What does it look like to pay cash for services? Where are the low cost clinics? What are the labs that people can use when they don't have insurance? Like, these are real conversations that we need to have, and real tools that we need to give people to work outside of a system. Because even if you have healthcare on the marketplace, the plans that are being offered are high deductible plans.
Yes.
So you're paying cash to get any service anyway. And I feel like we're not being honest about that reality, because we keep thinking, well, they're on the marketplace, they have insurance. Even businesses that are offering insurance are having to choose high deductible plans. And then the health savings accounts, that you're kind of going, how sick do I think I'm going to be this year? Because whatever you put in, it's a use or lose.
Yeah, who knows?
So you don't know, right? And so, I mean, it's just, it is baffling to me that we have set this up, but Rob is actually absolutely right that it is. I love the Epstein class. I think we should just call it the Epstein class, because that is what it is. And they make money at every turn. And this is where government comes in. Government comes in and puts the guardrails. And we have a state legislation supermajority right now that is so focused on business at all cost that they have not put any guardrails in. And this is why we have 91 candidates running for House and 25 Senate candidates.
Yeah, I'm glad you went there, Michelle. It's like, with the Epstein class, everything is for sale with these people. They're, they can't conceive that there are just some things we don't put our hands on, that the private sector can do everything, that the government can't do anything. There was a generation of folks who actually invested in this country and built things and did big stuff for the people of this country. Lost a giant of that generation this week. Our final story, Lee Hamilton passed away, a longtime state rep from Southern Indiana. Boy, he served in the House from 1965 to 1999. He was, he turned on the Vietnam War before a lot of folks did. He served on the Iran-Contra investigation, one of the primaries there, investigating Reagan's malfeasance. Also, later, after he had retired from the House, he was the vice chair of the 9/11 Commission, investigating the terrorist attack on the World Trade Center and the Bush administration's failures leading up to it. Retired, served in academia. Noted for his bipartisan long-term friendships across the aisle with Republicans, including longtime Senator Richard Lugar. The public the School of Public Affairs here at IU is named after the two of them. Did either of you have an opportunity to get to know Representative Hamilton at all? Doc?
I did. In fact, Hamilton's father was a Methodist minister and baptized me at Trinity Methodist Church in Evansville,
world, man.
in 1952. And I certainly, I certainly wished that that Hamilton had sometimes been less bipartisan. In retrospect, I wished he'd been a little more liberal on some things, but I can't second guess that now. We lost a giant, and I wish, I hope you want to say, oh, did they make him like that anymore?
I did not know him. However, I feel like it's that, 6 degrees of separation. I know several people who were incredibly close. And one of the things that keeps coming up is we've lost a mentor. And in today's political climate, there is an awful lot of people who are seeking to run for office and seeking power as a politician, and they want to stay the politician. They do not want to do the hard work of governance. And I think Hamilton was very much about governance, and that working across the aisle is what governance is. And we're at a point now where I fully understand that many of the people in power have moved so far to the right that we're at a point of resistance. And I think that's an appropriate response, but not everybody. And it is going to take just the will of the people to demand more of their electeds. We settle for the politician. We settle for the kayfabe. You and Scott and I, we talk about this a lot. We want the wrestling match and the game of it, right? Our team. And it's unfortunate in some respects that Indiana is such a sports enthusiast state, because we are almost hardwired for teams, right? But one of our one of our Rural Summit candidates down south, Byron Holland. He's running for Senate, and he was very, very good friends with Lee Hamilton. And he oftentimes said the only reason why, and he'll name these two cities, the only reason why they should ever be fighting is in a football game kind of thing. But then outside of that, our issues are our issues, and we champion together. And to me, that is the spirit of Lee Hamilton. And I think that Byron Holland carries that very well. We need more. We need more people like that. I grieve the loss of a mentor, but I challenge people who themselves are in positions of power. Do not follow the model that is happening with the Trump administration. There are other people to model after.
Yeah, 100%. Well, hey, listen, guys, we're just about here at the end. I appreciate both of you being here with me. Before we go, I do want to give you both an opportunity to tell folks where they can find you. Let me start with you, Dr. Rob. Can folks find more about you or Physicians for a National Health Program, or perhaps Medicare for Indiana, or Medicare for All Indiana, someplace online?
Sure. So the national group that I'm a part of, Physicians for a National Health Program, is pretty easy. It's pnhp.org, pnhp.org. And there's a huge amount of information about Medicare for All, healthcare reform, and related issues on their website. And then in Indiana, the Medicare for All Indiana group is on Substack. So on Substack, we are Medicare for All Indiana. And I think that's just what it is on Substack. And so and we're on Facebook, Medicare for All Indiana. And so we're out there in different ways. And for anybody living up around Purdue and Lafayette, I'm going to be doing a forum, a discussion 2 weeks from today. No, not 2 weeks from today, a week from today, in Lafayette, and maybe we can put that in the show notes too.
Yeah, send me the information, and I'll get that out later here this afternoon. Michelle, how about you? You wear a lot of hats. Where can find you?
Okay, so I am on Facebook and Instagram under Michelle Higgs for Indiana. The Rural Summit can be found at Indiana Rural Summit on Facebook. Also indianaruralsummit.org for our website. And I also want to plug, I've mentioned a lot of organizations today. You can find a list of all of them if you go to organizingindiana.org. There's also other resources and things. We also link to the Mad Voters Bill Tracker. It's trying to be that hub for the mycelium network is what we're trying to do there. But definitely you can find out more about the candidates and stuff in the next couple of weeks. We will be updating the Rural Summit website. And so, yes, go to indianaruralsummit.org.
Fantastic. Appreciate it. You mentioned Mad Voters. Again, I'm going to be back at 2 p.m. today with the State House Week in Review with Katie Rector from Mad Voters. We're going to talk about that later on this week. I've got Who's Left live a couple times on Thursday at 8 p.m. with 4th Congressional District candidate Drew Cox, and then on Friday night with 81st District State House candidate Sharon White. I will have Dana Black next Tuesday. A lot going on here. Please subscribe at Progressive Indiana Network for more, and more than just me. There are lots of great creators under our banner who are doing great work. We could all use your support. Again, that's Progressive Indiana Network. Find us on social media there at that handle on most of them. It's at PIN Indiana on Blue Sky and TikTok. I am at whosleft.us on Blue Sky, Instagram, and Threads, and at Who's Left on all the rest. I think that covers it. It's been great. Michelle, Doc, thank you guys. Appreciate it. Can't wait to have you back again. Except Doc, hey, no more rural OB closures next time you come back, right? All right. All right. Thanks, everybody. Have a good afternoon. Love each other, Indiana.
Okay.